Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Linda Green, and I'm going to be taking you through my 3Ps for untapping creative genius and coming up with winning ideas. I first created this for a TED Talk, and it was in very different times to the ones we're in now. So I'm going to be mindful of that. It's hard to think that in the times when the UK is about to go into lockdown again, with the rest of Europe, and we've got some really pivotal US elections happening at the moment, that we could really thrive at these times. But I'm going to show how using these 3Ps can help you and your business and your organizations do just that, to be able to survive and also thrive at the same time. So I've brought with me some friends, and they're just here behind me. So the little lady is not my grandmother. That is Ma Perkins, from a radio program created by Procter & Gamble. And I'm not a historian, but I know this because I love soaps. And that's where the term soap opera came from, because if we do go into recession, we think it may be only unrivaled by the Great Depression of the 1930s. And it was during that time that Procter & Gamble were actually able to survive and to thrive, because they decided to, instead of cutting ad expenditure, they decided to innovate and created Ma Perkins. They created the radio program. And I'm going to use some of the elements of that story to weave into our session today. And next to her is Captain Tom. I'll talk a little bit more about him later, but he's a real icon here in the UK during our first lockdown. So patterns, people, and purpose. Patterns. Patterns are, what's the change that you want? What do you want? Do you want to move into digital? Do you want to move into visual content? Do you need to have a more diverse workforce or more diversity in your products or your services? What is it that you want? What's the change that you want? Then we talk about the people, so the who. So who do you want to follow you? Who do you want to believe in your ideas as much as you do, and how do you do that? And that one there is the issue with most organizations that I go into, because they've brought in other innovation specialists that focus only on the patterns. They focus on the ideas. They focus on getting the ideas really good and right for the market, et cetera, which is great. But actually, it's the people that are really important, because it's not just about who you target, but it's also about how you get your organization to shift, to believe in the change that you want to have happen. And that's the tricky part. And I'm going to talk to you about that. And then finally, purpose. And purpose is the driving force. We all have free will, believe it or not. So why? It's the why. Why would I do those things? Why would I change? And that is absolutely essential in creative leadership, in untapping creative genius, and getting ideas out of the meeting room and into the market. Okay, so let's start off with patterns. So what change do you want? I'm going to play a little tiny trick with you. I'm going to ask you to add up a sum. And then you will, in your own space, you will say, this is the answer. And it's just a way for me to quickly show you how patterns work. So add 1,000, add 40, add 1,000, add 30, add 1,000, add 20, add 1,000, add 10. The answer is, did you get 5,000? It's not. It's 4,100. And the reason is because in basically 1, 2, 3 steps, I managed to get you to add 1,000, and you've got into a pattern. Whereas 40 plus 30 plus 20 plus 10 is not 1,000, it's 100. But your brain says, no, I've added 1,000 3 times, I'm going to add 1,000. So creativity is all about breaking these patterns. It's the ability to modify self-imposed constraints. So it's the stuff that you tend to do. And the higher up you are in an organization, the more patterns you've got, because you're paid for them. So, that's the key. It's knowing that the patterns are just the way our brains operate. We wouldn't be able to function if we didn't have patterns. But creativity, leading ideas, new ideas is about breaking those patterns. So the example I like to give is my Blue Planet example, because it was the start of my career, really. It was the millennium, and I was basically asked to help on animal programs, natural history programs, very important to the BBC, and they weren't doing very well. And they said, Linda, can you give us a hand? So being a mathematician by background, what I did was I looked at it and I went, okay, let's look at the audience. And the audience was skewed very much male. And I thought, well, if you want to increase audience figures, all you really need to do is bring in the women. And that's what we did. So basically, I asked a bunch of people, a representative sample of the UK population, what's your favorite animal? And they had a list. And basically, we found that women liked underwater animals predominantly. Fascinating insight, led to Blue Planet, lots of programs, that focused on the underwater. They focused on the kind of the ethereal. The music score was written for women. The actual storylines were anthropomorphic. So, all in all, we kind of increased our audiences, and the history is there. Basically, Blue Planet is still in the top 10. It was at the top of the charts in terms of sales for BBC Worldwide, now BBC Studios, for a very, very long time. Okay, so that's an example of breaking patterns. We don't want to just appeal to men. We find out we do, and we decide to actually, what else could we do? So it's two very simple questions you ask yourself, and you can do that right now. What do I always do? And what else could I do? So what's the change that you want to have happen? What is the change that you want? What's the break? What's the change? In my world, these are the FANGs. Quickly go through them. They all break their patterns hugely. In black, so we've got Facebook, which is the F, Amazon, which is the A, Netflix N, Google G, and S for Sky. Look at in black what they did do, and you can see, that they've totally changed. Facebook's, about news. They maybe don't want it to be as much. They're worrying about their influence, but they are very influential. The Amazon was about books. It's now, Prime, Amazon Prime and TV. Netflix was about old films, and they invest more than all of the other studios put together. Google was about tech, and it's now a cloud company. So you save your photos on there and you pay for that. And Sky was sport, and obviously, Game of Thrones and everything else. They spend a lot of money on entertainment. So, and you can see on the far right all the ways they invest in that break. So Facebook have got a cable on the Atlantic floor. Amazon are vertically integrated with warehouses, ships, trains, drones, etc. Netflix, drama, Google, server farms, Sky, huge investment. We know that EPG is the best. Well, I think it is anyway. So you can see that in terms of the kind of the key around patterns, to be able to really come up with those interesting ideas, the standout ideas. I mean, why do we need that? We need it because the world is full. It's full of stuff. You need to be able to break your patterns, and you need to be able to invest. Now, very important right now, obviously, a lot of businesses are looking at their costs and they're thinking, well, okay, it's all well and good to say, Linda, that we need to innovate, but actually we also need to make sure that we've got enough money in our existing with our existing content or products and in our existing markets. And that's absolutely right. You protect what you need to, but you protect to be able to have a very focused innovation to the work that you do, because that's the way to thrive. There's still growth possible if you pick the right area, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. On to people. So people, let's move to that. So these are the people you need to convince. These are the people that you need to believe in your ideas as much as you do. So if we think about that, what we know is that leadership is the key to this. So the people, who's going to actually follow you? Who's going to believe in your ideas as much as you do? And this is the bit that most organizations forget to do, because a lot of innovation specialists come in and they focus specifically on the idea. The challenge of that is that if an organization's culture isn't right for that idea, the people, if there's a mismatch, and we'll talk in a minute about purpose, if there's a mismatch between the patterns that you want to have happen, the people and the way what they're like, and the purpose in terms of what drives them, then it's not going to work. So these are the fault lines. It's all about leadership, creative leadership. And what we know is that leadership is 40 to 70% environment you set. Walt Disney knew this. He had 3 different rooms, and in those 3 different rooms, he behaved completely differently. He had the realist room, the dreamer room, and the critic room. And actually what I've done is I've taken that whole concept to another level. So what we also know is this kind of Venn diagram, and I don't know if you can see it well, but basically you've got the 3 elements that you need to be aware of, and that is that creativity is just coming up with ideas. So it's the process that leads to those ideas. It's what drives and leads those ideas to happen in your organization. Innovation is the successful adoption of that change or those ideas or those patterns. It's leadership that's the catalyst. Without leadership, without your people your leaders being able to create the right environment for those ideas to flourish, they're not going to happen. So the system I use is really simple. Basically, there's 4 stages to the creative process. Everyone who works in innovation knows that. So you've got clarify, you identify what the challenge is, what's the market you're trying to appeal to, what's the change that you want, what are the things that you actually want to achieve. You then come up with ideas. So you generate lots of ideas. That's all about divergent thinking and convergent thinking. You develop up those ideas, you basically make them work, and then you implement them. So you make them happen. So those are the kind of 4 stages: the why, the what if, the how, and the when. In terms of leadership, we know it's environment. So what you need to do as a leader, as a creative leader, is to set a different environment for those 4 stages. You cannot use the leadership style that you normally would, because actually the challenge about coming up with new things and breaking, those patterns and those self-imposed constraints is that you can't tell people that's the outcome. Because as soon as you tell people that's the outcome, then it's your outcome and not theirs. It's your patterns, it's your belief system. So the 4 stages are as follows. So basically, the first one is visionary. So you need to inspire a shared vision. You need to get people behind, this is where I want to go. And that's all about the purpose. So this is where I'm going and this is why I'm going there. Then you have to be an inspirational leader. So you need to encourage the heart. You need to give your power away and enable others to act. You need to be an influential leader on the 3rd stage. So you need to challenge the system. You need to be able to influence and persuade, because if an idea is truly new, think of Ma Perkins. Think of the radio program. I mean, there would have been people saying, well, why are we doing this right now? We haven't got the money. We should be hunkering down. But you need to challenge the system, and anything that's new will require that. If you can go straight to implementation from an idea, then my thing to you would be, that's not new. Whatever you're doing is not creative leadership. It's not a new pattern. And then finally, you need to be tactical. You need to be able to model the way and walk the talk. You need to be able to say, these are the steps we're going to go through, and to take people through it, and they can then follow you. So ultimately, in terms of your people and what you need to do, you need to know to set the right environment, for those people to be able to deliver that idea from start to finish, and to be able to make that change happen. So it's about training up your leaders. At the BBC, we reached 1 in 10 of the organization. We had a creative network of trained people that could both lead ideas and lead teams. So be able to do the leadership side and the pattern side and the creativity side. And we had 250. So it's about equipping your people to know the environment and to know what to set. Okay, so now we're going to go on to purpose. So on to purpose. Purpose is the most important of the three P's. It's the driving force. It's what gets everything to happen. It's what moves people along to change their patterns. But it does need to match the people at that moment in time. So in other words, there needs to be congruence between those three. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. I mean, if we look at who we've got behind us, we've got Ma Perkins and Captain Tom. So Ma was humble and honest. You know, her, in terms of her characteristics, in a time when things were really difficult, when life was challenging, she was there to resolve problems. She was there to look after you, to care for you, and to give you hope that there would be a solution. Captain Tom, exactly the same, 100 years old, just been knighted. He did 100 laps of his garden for the NHS and to raise money for charity, and similar attributes. He's honest, he's humble, he was elderly, and it's bearing those things in mind that the clues as to what people want, the why, you know, the purpose, what the purpose might be behind your products or the changes you want in your organization are around you. So, you know, this is about why changing. So why should we change and why now? And what's fascinating is when I started to look into the neuroscience of it, is that for change to happen, you need to access behind the right temporal lobe. So in other words, there's three networks at play. I mean, this is oversimplified, of course, but there's three networks of play in the brain. You've got the executive attention network, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is in red in that picture. You've got the kind of blue and the yellows, which is the salience network. And just behind the right ear is the right temporal lobe, which is where they've discovered ideas come from. Now, the really interesting thing about that, I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd, so of course I really like it, is actually that any purpose, if you give something a purpose, it has two key elements to it. Firstly, it's simple, so the prefrontal cortex is switched off, and it's salient, so the back of the head, the salience network switches on, because you have to do that for the right temporal lobe to work. So you have to switch off the hard thinking bit, the Daniel Kahneman type 1 thinking, and switch on the salience network. And that's exactly what purpose does. Purpose, it allows the person to be able to engage with it and to be able to be driven by it. And you can see it with all kind of winning shows, platforms, etc. I could take you through all the fangs, but we haven't got time. But in terms of Strictly Come Dancing, these are all the shows I've worked on. So for Strictly, you know, it's all about the fairy tale. So Come Dance, that's in America, it's Dancing with the Stars, and globally it's that. So it's the fairy tale. So that's what they want. You know, it fits with the market. It actually fits very much now with audiences because they do need a fairy tale. For X on the Beach, it's what's the worst thing that could happen on holiday. There's a possibility now that many people can't go on holiday. So I think it's, you know, it's probably people want to see the best of holidays, not the worst of holidays. And for Top Gear, what we came up with when we relaunched Top Gear with Andy Willman and Jeremy Clarkson was actually it's to give men a roller coaster ride. Because their life at the time, it was the turn of the millennium and it was very safe. And they really wanted to be able to play out. And that's why that was very popular. And I wonder, see, my question really now is, bearing in mind Ma Perkins and Captain Tom, do we really want that right now? You know, when you're thinking about how to make your change meaningful, to give it that purpose, you need to think about where people are. You know, going back to the very start of my presentation, you know, there's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of activism and terrorism. You know, there's a very divided society with the haves and have-nots. So togetherness, hope, you know, belief in something better, anything that's uplifting is probably more likely to be the kind of purpose that you'd like to be aiming for right now. And we're going to end on something, a gift. It's a gift for you. So, you know, it's basically looking at what is meaningful for you. So if you want to make something meaningful, what are your drivers? Because if you understand your drivers, then the pattern you want to make is more likely to happen. So here are 7 columns, starting with accomplishment, the first one, and tenacity. The second one's faith. and responsibility, etc. So you can see there's 7 columns. I'd like you to read them and then pick one word per column that's most important to you. So 1 word per column. And then of those 7 words that you've picked, so 1 per column, pick your final 3. So what are your final 3? And these are my final 3. So creativity, learning, and compassion. And the reason I really wanted to share that as a gift is because this whole program, the creative leadership program at the BBC, what I've dedicated my career to ever since, wasn't going to happen, because actually it was funded by a leader who left the BBC, and I had no way of funding it anymore. And what happened was, because of my 3 areas of creativity, learning, and compassion, I'd been working a lot in charities, and they were really fascinated by it, and they started to buy it from the BBC. And then external clients were buying it from all over the world. And then finally, the BBC actually bought it. So, when you're trying to sell something, you're trying to create change in any organization, you need to tap into your drivers. Make sure that when we go back to the start, when we go to the patterns, when we go to the people, and we go to the purpose, make sure that your purpose, what drives you, what matters to you, matches the patterns. It matches what you want to achieve. It then matches the people. It matches what they want. And then it's more likely to happen. You will untap your creative genius in your organization. And I wish you well. And thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.